I'm always going to warn that if you have one scripture that doesn't work in harmony with all the other scriptures, don't blame the Bible. You got to do more research, and you have to go into the words. I put a very big amount of responsibility on these legal pastors and legal reverends and priests with their titles that are preaching to the blind that sit there and hope they get spoon-fed. I'm not here trying to give you a spoon-fed message. I want you to do research, and if there's something incorrect, you let us know. Send us an email. That's all. Surprisingly, we have very rarely been sent an email that was based on possibly an inaccurate enunciation of a word that was in the Bible. And so it's just here and there, but it's not based on the research actually into the actual understanding of the words. So all I'm telling you is that if you're going to blame your pastor or your reverend or your priest, whoever it is that's been spoon feeding you what you thought was in the Bible, that's your mistake. You were obligated under this journey to do this yourself. So don't be lame and blame, because that's what be lame means, just to be lame. And that's a very lame position to take, that you're going to blame that pastor. They hold responsibility before God for their inaccuracies. And Romans 13 is one of the biggest mistakes out there, because it's based on not looking at the words that were in there and then assuming they just mean something that they don't. So we need to go into the concordances to check them out. So the whole journey, as we realize, is private trespassing on public. What is private, what is God's property, and what is the property of Caesar? And these are two different sides. One's private, one's public. Don't get confused in the idea of when you commingle in together the two, and then you try to do private use of the public, because you're always going to pay for that trespass. We don't understand the scripture, we're not going to understand the escape. The message is in here, not in the law books, though the law books will have to support it based on the truth that will come out of this. So in Romans 13, Paul, as Peter warned, was very hard to understand. So he had an understanding of the Roman civil system. He was a Pharisee, so he knew a lot about the Talmud from the time of Babylon, when God took his spirit away from the nation of Israel and allowed them to be pummeled by the heathen nations around them. And then you've got him now as a believer in Jesus Christ. So you can imagine what's going on in Paul's head. And I began to realize when I started to read Paul's writings that I was understanding how he could be misunderstood. So why would there be a warning in the scripture? Paul was hard to understand if it's just so carte blanche easy to understand him. So I look at Romans 13, chapter 13, verse 1. It says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. For there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." Okay, I'm going to be very direct on this one. The first word used in that scripture is, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers." Let. What did that word let mean? Did it mean allow? Or did it mean something different, which could change the whole context of that first sentence? We look at Strong's Concordance that brings us to 2967 in the Greek, and I'm not going to try to enunciate the Greek word here. You can look it up yourself. But what it basically meant was, it was a word that was giving the meaning of prevent, forbid, hinder. So if I change that to forbid every soul, forbid every soul, or hinder every soul be subject unto the higher powers, it's saying that we were not really to enter in with them. There was a warning about what happens when you do enter in with these powers or these governments. For there is no power but of God. So he allows both sides to exist. He gives you choice and election. He says further, "Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God." and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Now, if you're in the legal and you're not playing by the rules, you're now resisting what belongs to the Caesar side. If you're claiming a Caesar legal title in the civil law, in the registration, and you've taken that on by assumption, well, God's not going to protect you. He's warning, Paul was warning. He knew what it was to be in that system of the Romans. He was fully aware of it. So he's giving you a warning. He's saying that in the beginning of this, it's a forbidden act. So this statement of birth document makes total sense now, because you're not being told to go ahead to claim legal title on the statement of birth. They mark that as their field, their territory, their property. It's legal, and that's their title. You cross that line, you better watch out what comes, what the ramifications are for doing that. So this is definitely a forbidden go-ahead document. Not to go ahead, it's a joker. It means something contrary to what you thought. This didn't give you legal title to bear the arms or bear that title. It was telling you this belonged to them, and you better cross the line. And your parents had lack of knowledge to put your given name into that record. It shouldn't have been in there. The private doesn't belong to the public. The Registrar General is a public title registry, not a private one. So we've got a problem going on here. There's a lack of knowledge in reading this scripture. So again, put the word hinder, forbid in there. Forbid the soul. We know a soul is what a man is. Okay, we're not talking about a legal fiction concept here. It's saying to forbid that, not to allow it to happen. And then what happens if you do that? So he allows them, they're ordained to be there because they're going to control what's going to happen with good and evil if it mixes together. So it says, whoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance. We talked about the guy going down the road saying that he didn't need a driver's license and didn't need a plate and didn't need insurance, but he's burying legal title and he's trafficking in the Caesar's world with Caesar's title, and he's saying not. Well, what's going to happen? That's why they pull out the clubs, and they're warning you on this because Paul's being very clear. Okay, so there's those that enter in and resist. People think that I'm being an anarchist here by saying there's a problem there. Your private shouldn't be in that public. That's what I'm trying to get across in the video. This was an involuntary situation. The child could never have elected to choose. Okay? And the parents unfortunately made a bad choice on what they put on that document, but it's still correctable. Okay? Now, it says, for the rulers are not a terror to good works. Well, your truth is good. You wouldn't want to trespass on them. So certainly, if you had never placed what was yours in claiming something that didn't belong to you, truth is a stranger to the legal public fiction world, you wouldn't have a problem going on in trespass, having to pay for fees and fines. People have to comprehend what is public and what is private. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Well, surname also means evil name. It was also called a nickname, which meant almost like a demonic name. That's why it's that even that Saint Nick concept from old Saint Nick, it's almost an oxymoron in itself because it's a saint evil. You don't. How could something good or righteous be evil at the same time? That's impossible. So it's just Nick meant evil one in that sense, in that connotation with a nickname. That's why nicknames meant evil name, wrong name, cog name, false name, pseudonym. It's not a true name. And then it says, wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt receive praise of the same. For he is a minister of God to thee for good, because there is an equitable relief, because God will judge the world in equity. Okay? But if thou do that which is evil, well, if you've trespassed onto the evil side by claiming something with your private name and entering that into the public in merger, that's your problem now. That's not the state's problem. It says, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to exercise wrath upon him that doeth evil. Well, when God-given property merges into satanic, evil, unbelieving territory and property claiming, there's a problem of evil going on there. You must read the scripture properly. If you do not do that, then you're going to get caught. And that's why every time I've tried to explain this to pastors and those that are in the legal system prospering from the blindness of all their congregated following, they are upset and they put me on, oh, he's rebelling against Caesar. No, I'm telling you the truth from this scripture. I'm actually doing the proper thing, not the improper direction. I'm not giving you counsel into doing something that's against Caesar.